Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that passes wisdom from generation to generation. And today's guest is Bailey Holloway. Bailey is the Social Impact Director at the League Apps. And in our conversation today, we talk about everything underneath the sun regarding female sports, the importance of female sports and the ripple effect it has on all of society. We talk about also some really good tips for coaches to make sure girls feel included, and so much more about how we can really impact the next generation of female athletes that will then really make an impact on our society. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Bailey, and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. I'm thrilled to have our conversation today, and I'm thrilled to talk about everything under the sun, female sports, and just the impacts that it has, not only just on, the individual level, but on the society level. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be a part of this podcast, and I'm really excited for the things we're going to dive into today.
Beautiful. I am as well. And so without further ado, the first question we ask all of our guests is, what is your definition of impactful leadership?
Yeah. So my definition, the first two things that come to mind for me when I think of impactful leadership are listening and learning. I grew up believing I was a leader. I was a captain on my sports teams. I was a part of different groups and student government, and I believed I was a leader, and I think that I did a good job. And then it wasn't until my freshman year of college that I realized I wasn't a very good listener. I was prescribing what I thought people needed. And when I had that wake up moment, it was very profound. It was actually at a leadership conference. And I just couldn't believe that I had gone on so long, thinking that I knew what I needed to be a good leader. And then I just didn't allow myself to grow. So the reason why I think listening and learning is a critical part of impactful leadership is because if you as a leader can create an environment where people are able to be the best versions of themselves, they're not afraid to try and fail or pursue their passions. If you're enabling people to live their most authentic life under your leadership, then you're going to have better outcomes. Your goals that you're going to accomplish, they'll be accomplished. And also they are going to be more diverse in their, in the way that they end up being, because you're allowing people to really express themselves fully. So that's my wrapped up definition of impactful leadership.
I love it. And I think that was a big shift for me too, that I realized, especially when I was working with first grade kids, there's that, I just watched the movie Matilda, and it's very funny because it's I'm the adult, you're the kid, to the extreme, right? And so when I was doing that, when I was in that role, I was, really just thought they always needed to be told what to do. But I started asking them more questions and listening. And I think that's been something that's really helped me as a leader, and also be able to connect with, the athletes or with my team members, that builds that relationship. Because I feel like you're kind of talking about, you're always learning and you want to have that influence on someone. You can't have an influence on them if you're always talking at them and always being the, kind of the dictator leader of where you're dominating the room and talking all the time. So
yeah, absolutely. And shouldn't the goal of every leader be the development of the people that they're leading? They should be able to see themselves in a position of leadership. And the only way you can help them get there is by making them feel recognized and validated.
Yeah, no, 100%. They have to feel like they want to belong, that not like they want to belong, but they actually do belong. And that's a perfect way to shift over to our, topic and conversation around female sports, because sports in general, it can be just such a masculine, boys versus boys, thinking about football, even basketball, and just the world of female sports. So I'm really excited to have this conversation for me as a male coach and as a former male athlete, and learning about how I can be better and more inclusive. So my first question for you is just, kind of talking about the broader scheme of, female sports. Can you talk about the impact it has just on general society?
Yeah. Well, women's sports are really pillars in their communities in ways that I see male sports are not as often. Like female athletes are constantly going above and beyond their role as an athlete and celebrity to actually make their community better. We'll do two examples. I'm a soccer and basketball nut, so the NWSL and the WNBA are my two leagues. The WNBA was the first league to start like protesting for say her name, Black Lives Matter on the court after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in 2020. And like it wasn't even a question. It was just like these female athletes are just fierce advocates for equality, and they have been. And the work that they've been doing to advocate for Brittany Griner's release because she's been detained unfairly in Russia. Like, that's just one way. The NWSL also, like, as we are developing as a league, you may not know this, but this is actually the third professional women's soccer league to exist in the United States. There were two prior that have both folded since. There was like some, not like scandal, but, you know, saucy things that kind of kept the league from being able to flourish like a traditional sports league. So the NWSL, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. We as in fans of the league and like, yeah. And with like our league, this is the like longest established professional soccer league in the US. And so, of course, like more cities are popping up to have their own teams. And there's been 2 expansion teams added this past year, both in California, actually. So your neck of the woods, Angel City,
Go
FC,
Angel City,
and San Diego Wave. Go Angel City. I know. I went and watched the Thorns, my home team, play Angel City FC when I was home a few months ago in Portland. And it was awesome. Like Angel City FC, within their first year of existence, already has a huge fan base. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but Julie Foudy, who is an investor in the company I work at, League Apps, she's also one of the owners of Angel City FC. And I actually met her the day before the game, before I flew home. And I was like, just so you know, Julie, I'll be seeing your team play tomorrow, but I'm going to be rooting against them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But always, it was so cool. It was like a life dream. But looping back to the point, like Angel City FC, they are a non-traditional sports club. Like their whole goal is to be a part of their community. And what that means for them is actually being really intentional about who owns and makes decisions on behalf of the club, having a really direct impact. Like this year, they've donated over 75,000 meals and 15,000 sports bras just to kids in their communities. Like they have been so involved in like actually advancing people who typically are forgotten in societal efforts, which is just like why I'm obsessed with women's sports, particularly soccer and basketball.
So as I hear you talking, I'm trying to take down some notes. It's just like that female sports are just integral to the community. And thinking about, I do remember, a couple of years ago with the pandemic, and the WNBA players were the first people to speak up. And I also just didn't know, I knew that Angel City is actually, it's a big deal over here. And so I haven't quite caught a game yet. And I've had some friends go, and they look like lit. They're like sold out, and like they're popping. And it's really cool to see how much that they're, supporting the community and donating sports bras and like doing these things that probably include more women and more female athletes in general.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll definitely have to make your way to a game because they're also doing pretty well this season.
Nice.
So
we love winning.
We just love to see women's sports shine. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do.
So with that, can you talk about the broader effects, right? You've kind of touched on these community effects, and you talked a little bit about how female sports are different than male sports. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit more? I know you touched on it a little bit.
Well, this is actually a really well-timed conversation, given we just celebrated the 50th year of Title IX, like about 2 weeks ago, which Title IX has done so much for the advancement of women's sports. And it's funny because Title IX was originally created to create equitable opportunities within education. But the sports community has completely taken that under their wing. There's still a long, long way to go. Like, for example, the amount of sports opportunities that girls and women have today is still less than what men had in 1972 before Title IX was passed. We know that like the average girl drops out of sports around age 13, 14. We know that there's only like 4% through 5.4% of media coverage actually covers women's professional sports out of all sports coverage, despite women's professional athletes making up about 40% of professional sports. So we have come so far in the last 50 years. Just anecdotally, like my grandma has always been really supportive of me and my sisters playing soccer and basketball growing up. And she always like came to all of our games and cheered us on. And it wasn't until in high school when I had a conversation with her, I'm like, so what sports did you play? And she was like, well, we weren't really allowed to play sports. And in PE, we would do cheerleading. All I really was allowed to do was cheerleading. And so when I got to call my grandma on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, we were just talking about how grateful she is that like she got to see her family and like granddaughters live in a better world than the one she grew up in, because like I think it's shown statistically, whether we're talking about fewer rates of incarceration, like better health statistics physically and mentally, better like academic performance for kids who are involved in sports, like having those opportunities sets people up for success in their life and in their careers. And when those opportunities are disproportionately given to boys rather than girls, that's a systematic failure. So what I am hoping to do in my life's work is work to make sport access. Soccer's kind of my bread and butter, but work to make sure that every girl who wants to play sports is able to safely, accessibly, and in a cost-friendly way.
I love that. I thinking so much as a coach, right? And I think you hit on an early point that, you know, most girls drop out of sports by the age of 13 and 14, right? They're not even playing pickup on the park. Like, you know, boys probably more so feel more comfortable with sports and are playing pickup, even if they don't play on their high school basketball team. Like I think about for me in my role is I want to, you know, make sport as fun and accessible for as many people as possible so they can play after they're 18. You know, I remember talking to you, you know, about a month ago now. You said you're like, I'm in like 3 female soccer leagues. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your story and like why sport is so important to you, and then how we can maybe, you know, translate that and keep including more and more people into sport, especially females.
Thanks for bringing up that I play sports now, because I actually scored a goal in my game last night. It felt very good. So thank you. Yeah. So I studied essentially sustainable development in college, and I wrote my thesis about housing inequality in informal housing communities in South Asia and how climate change will disproportionately affect people with unstable housing or that lack the right to tenure of the land that they're living on. So I'm very passionate about climate change and housing. And honestly, I took a sports break during college. Like I competed in mock trial. That was like my sport in college. I always joked. And at the time I was going through this like personal feminist eye-opening experience. And I was like, sports are so patriarchal. I'm so upset that most teams are owned by white men, that there's such great like gender parity or such a lack of gender parity in pay. And I was so angry. And then the pandemic happened. I was like, okay. And then I don't even know what it was, but just like this wave overcame me where I was like, wow, actually, I can't discount women's sports the way that I did the past few years, because after studying sustainable development, I understood that when you look at how women's sports are played across the world, what kinds of sports women are given access to, it says so much as a metric for measuring development and gender equality globally. Like, yes, it may be legal for girls to play sports in a country. Like Brazil legalized women playing soccer 2 years before Title IX was passed in the US. So like women were legally not allowed to play soccer in Brazil until 1970. Well, it's beyond the legal part. It's where, okay, how can we understand how much families and parents can and are willing to invest in their daughters' athletic like potential and leadership potential and like extracurricular activities. So that's kind of when I had that reckoning moment, I was like, oh my God, like this all makes so much sense in my life. And then I just started to dive in head first and like being an obsessive fan. And I bought and read like tons of books about women's sports, inequalities in sport. And yeah, that's kind of when the pieces clicked together for me. And yeah.
So you talked about the metrics. I'm curious about, like, I think you briefly touched on it, but I'd love to, hear more about the importance for, what does the data say that, like, if there are more female sports, what happens for these communities, our states, our countries, if more females are participating in sports?
So when we see more women participating in sports around the world, like we see much greater access to education.
Interesting.
These women, like statistically, kids and girls who participate in sports, they are more likely to go to college. And that's not because they got an athletic scholarship. That's just because like they are given opportunities to develop leadership skills that make them want more and push for more. That's one thing. We also see, kind of like we mentioned a few minutes ago, but like when female athletes and women's athletes make it to the highest level, they are constantly pulling up other girls and women to bring them up as well. We'll go back to the example of Julie Foudy. Julie Foudy is a world champion, a gold medalist. Now she's an announcer. She also runs her own soccer camps where she provides low-cost programming for girls who are interested in playing soccer. My manager, Benita Fitzgerald mostly, she is a gold medalist in track and field and has spent her career since she won gold in the LA 84 Olympics just opening the door for other women. And she was the CEO of Laureus Foundation, which provides grants to sports-based youth development organizations. And now she is a part of the Impact team, which helps us, my team helps provide organization support for orgs that are providing free sports to kids. So that's another thing is, and then I guess the last thing that I think of, which is also really topical because another member of the 99 World Cup squad, her name is Brianna Scurry. She's the goalkeeper. She was one of the only Black women on the team and was one of the only Black women's national team players for a long time. She did an interview recently with a few Black players on the women's national team now. And one of the players said essentially that like after games, when like they get to go and meet some of the fans, like the young girls, like sometimes there will be little like Black girls seeing a Black player, like someone who looks like them on the national team, and their parent will look at them and say, look, she looks just like you. And like that, as Mitch Purse said in this interview, like that is almost like without words, so valuable to see people who look like you, who are like you, succeeding at the highest level. And it's not even just in sport, it's as leaders and people who like can chase their dreams. Like if you see someone like you, like what I saw in Abby Wambach growing up, like it's just so important. So it's like an incalculable factor is actually seeing a ceiling being shattered and being able to see yourself doing the same.
And I think that's one of the biggest reasons I'm passionate about sport, because I feel like I learned so much of my leadership skills and my ability to collaborate with the team. And, hey, if I work super hard at something, like I can accomplish a goal, which now helps me as a podcaster, right? Like, so just opening up the door for more people to play sports is such an amazing opportunity. And I really I can hear it in your voice talking about, the people that you work for and now the goalie for the USA and the fact that she is, having a ripple effect on people that, never saw themselves playing, female women's soccer. And it's just then it opens that door to, hey, maybe I play in high school. And then, you go through, you play high school, you meet a couple of new people and, hey, maybe I'll go to college. I'll go to community college. And then you go to community college and you're like, hey, I'll transfer. And it's just this really, like you talk about, immeasurable, ripple effect, but it really does play a big role in our communities. And it's why I'm so passionate about sports. So for me as a coach, how can I make sure that I'm doing my part and, making sure that females feel included in my programming, talking, I guess, a little specifically, we have I'm thinking specifically right now for my basketball school that I work at, we really, just to be transparent, we don't have a lot of females, right? How can I make sure that the few that we do feel comfortable and then want to bring their friends in so they can start loving the game of basketball?
I love that this is something that you are hoping to expand in your organization too, because access is obviously a huge barrier, first of all. Out of all of the organizations, which is about 140 that are a part of our Fun Play community, we serve about 60% boys. So there's still inequality there. And we serve organizations that exclusively provide free or low cost programming. So I think a couple points of advice is, if you can, recruit women's coaches. It's just different. Doesn't always have to be a women's coach, but if you can, it's really great for retention, for girls to see themselves in their coach, see themselves actually being a leader in the space after. I think also doing your best to make sure that it's girl centered. Listen to what your girls are saying. When you reference professional players and teams, make them women's teams. There's plenty of amazing athletes. Feel free to talk about Sabrina Ionescu. She is an absolute queen, and I love watching her play as a Liberty fan. Yeah, and Scodex. When I was a coach for girls soccer, and I will start coaching girls soccer again in the fall, took a pandemic break. Something I tried really hard to do is before and after practice, show up early, have conversations with your players, make sure that they feel heard by you. If you get only a few words in this 15-minute conversation, I love that. Feeling listened to and cared for by your coach goes a long way in feeling and fostering a sense of belonging on a team. And also, I guess lastly is make sure you're cultivating a space that kind of relates back to my impactful leadership, where people feel really safe to be themselves. And it doesn't have to be wins or losses. It's you're doing your best. And I'm so proud of you for doing your best, which I'm sure you're doing in boys sports as well. But when there's a lot of messages in the world demeaning and diminishing women's sports and women's athletics, it's just so important to make sure that this space is dedicated to girls and none of that hateful talk is tolerated.
And kind of, what I'm hearing you say is focusing on progress. Cause I think, I'm around quite a few coaches and I see, and a lot of what you say honestly applies to boys as well. Just the listening and focusing on progress and not focusing on wins so much. Cause I think a lot of times I see a few, honestly less coaches now, but focus just so much on winning and the outcome. And a lot of times that is, especially when you're developing young athletes, is literally is out of their control. So if you're focusing on winning for someone that is going to play for their first or second time, right? Like, you're not focusing on the progress, right? You're only focusing on an outcome that really is out of their control because they just started playing. They have to learn the skill before they can learn how to compete. So, and just help making sure that people feel like they belong, right? Like, I think that applies to boys too. And I think sometimes, boys get overlooked on that, but it's even, obviously it's especially important for girls to feel like they belong when I'm thinking about my program. I'm like, there's really only one or two girls. How can I make sure that they feel, comfortable being here, without me being patronizing, right? Without being like super extra, like just like making sure that they feel included, and having those like little 15 seconds before practice, like even like something I like to ask is just like, what do you eat before practice? Just like little things. A lot of times, because then they start opening up like, oh, I did this during my day and blah, 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 right? Like, you don't always have to ask that, like, how's your day? And, there are like little things to like get them to kind of open up.
Yeah, I love that you're asking like a very specific question and like giving them the opportunity to share little nuggets of their personality. And also tying back to something you just said too, is like, we should think about how we define winning, because if such a slim percentage of girl athletes and athletes in general are going to make it professional, like, we really need to make sure that our coaches are fostering leadership development and like personal development first and foremost as a team. So like, winning can mean that 5 years after you're done coaching these kids, since you coach around the middle school level, that means like 90% of your team is going to college, or 85% of your team started caring more about their classes at school because like you let them know that it is okay for them to try and fail. Like, thinking about like, oh, they don't need to win this tournament, but like, if I have 3 girls that are holding their head up high, and I noticed this so much when I was coaching my U10 girls soccer team, girls are like systematically taught to not be selfish. And so we would have these little girls like running down the field, dribbling the ball, and they would just keep passing it even when they had a shot, because they like didn't want to be the one to be selfish. Like, I didn't notice that when I coached boys. Like, it's just different. You're taught to share more. And if you have 3 of your 10 basketball players, like, actually going down the court and taking a shot when they have it, even when it's risky, and like, that's a huge development.
That is a huge development. And I can tell you right now, most boys don't have a problem dribbling down and shoot the ball. Although some do, so I'm not going to lump them all in there. But it is societal norms. Like, it's, especially like I look at parents and I see, the parents of the boys are just like, shoot the ball, shoot the ball, shoot the ball. And, I don't have as many female kids, so I can't necessarily say what it is, but I would say that's definitely something. Like, they get the ball, they don't even look, like, I'm thinking about basketball, they don't even look at the hoop to score, right? They look at to pass to someone else, right? Because they're like, I don't want to do it. And maybe I'm honestly thinking about this right now. I'm thinking about one specific girl. She has an older brother in the class, and that maybe it's also, she doesn't want to make a mistake. And I think maybe I do try and create that environment but to even, go back to what you were talking about, creating safe environments. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you think is safe environments. But for me, it's probably just really making sure that if you shoot the ball and you miss, that's okay. So just creating that opportunity and environment where it's okay to fail and make mistakes.
Absolutely. I've been coaching T-ball this summer. It's a co-ed first grade league, and they're so freaking cute. Their little baseball pants that they roll up and tuck into their socks. Like, I have had such a good time, despite not very much about T-ball as a sport. And I only have like a few girls on my team, and I just like have been absolutely thrilled with seeing how hard they get after it. And like have just been roughed up with the boys. And there's like, there's this one girl that like is really fast, and I'm excited for her sports journey and life journey. And she'll like get the ball. And there's this one boy who has a little bit of a harder time getting the ball. Like, if, it's hit off the tee. And so they'll both run up and she will beat him, and then he'll get really upset. And it's like, every day, like every Saturday when I coach, I have to have the same conversation with him that like, you are trying your best and you are like succeeding just by being here. And sometimes he'll even like take off his mitt, throw it at the ground, walk off the diamond. And I'm like, okay, you have to come back here, because I know it's hard. And the first game ever, he did that. He stormed off. And when we switched to finally be at bat, he hit the highest hit of the game. Like it went over kids' head. It was awesome. And this was all after like 10 minutes before he was like crying because all these kids kept beating him to the ball. So just like you said, encouraging kids to try. So cliche.
It is,
so
and it really is. And it's, I feel like sometimes for me, in even giving feedback and about trying is being specific, because I feel like sometimes as a coach, and this is just probably even a little bit more general than just women's sports, but it's just like you say, good job. But like, what do you mean by that? I try and be, a little bit more specific in my feedback. Okay, thinking, basketball, you held your follow through, or I really know nothing about soccer in terms of like what they would be doing, but being as specific as possible on the feedback I found is incredibly helpful. Are there any other, kind of thoughts that you have around creating like safe environments for girls?
Rooting back to my core leadership thesis, which is just like really making sure that your girls feel like they're listened to. And that's something I try to do every day, that I'm coaching. And also like in terms of safety, if a player is telling you they're hurt, believe them, let them sit out. You don't need to push a player for the sake of the game. Also like in terms of emotionally safe, like maybe the girls on your team who sign up for basketball don't know all the rules, and you've been telling one player you've done 4 reach fouls in this scrimmage, and she's like too afraid to ask what that is because maybe she doesn't know. Like when I started playing basketball in 6th grade, that was the case for me. I had no idea what the rules were. I kept getting random fouls because I grew up playing soccer. So basketball is obviously so different in terms of the contact that's allowed. And I was too afraid to ask my male coaches what these rules were because like their daughters were on the team and they were the cool girls at the school. And I didn't want people to know that I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't want my coach to think because I don't know this rule that I should be sat out because I'm bad, like that was a huge thing for me. And then, like referencing and championing women, like professional athletes, even though your kids probably won't make it pro, but if you can be like, oh my gosh, that shot was just like that Nigel Laney. She's so good. She plays for the Liberty. Like that can make a kid feel really,
100%.
really special.
So and definitely that's one thing I've been learning, and I still need to practice more, is talking about female sports, of referencing. For me, it's the Sparks. Like a lot of times we reference the Lakers and the Clippers because they're the local teams, and everyone loves the Warriors because the Warriors win. So kind of referencing definitely female teams. But I hear you on that, and just really like being going back to being super specific, because I know for a fact that is the worst thing I was at. When I was a coach that went from player to coach, I like just said a bunch of things, and they would look at, and this is boys, but they would have no idea what I'm talking about. And the reach and foul is a big thing because it's still a thing. And so I have to like go and demonstrate, like, you can't do this and this. Like, otherwise, if you don't show them, they don't know what you're talking about. There's a lot of lingo in sports that I think we coaches forget about, that athletes and kids, they're just learning so much right now. Like, they have their stuff in school, they have their stuff with their parents, their friends. Like, they can only take in so much. So like we have to just be patient in how we teach, and being like probably having to explain things multiple times. So I always have a rule of thumb: if you don't say things 10 times as a coach, they're not going to learn. They're gonna have no idea what you're talking about. Like, you really have to repeat yourself quite a bit. Yeah. So just doing things 10 times.
Out of all demographics of kids in the U.S., Latina girls have the lowest amount of participation in sports. And something I'll be working on in September and October for Hispanic Heritage Month is we're going to be doing a morning miles challenge, raising money for the organizations that specifically target Latina youth in their sports programming. And in my research, learning more about why this discrepancy is here, and like, you're in LA, I'm in New York, there's obviously a ton of Spanish speakers in these areas. And there's a lot of reasons why Latina youth are not playing sports. But one thing that should be pretty easy that we can start doing now is encouraging organizations and programs to post bilingual registration forms, putting things out in Spanish, in Chinese, in other languages that are going to be spoken by your community. Like even just doing a quick search and seeing, okay, most of our students come from this area, this percentage of this area speak this language. And then you can include different languages there because first of all, like sports registration can be daunting when a parent has to pay, but also if a parent can't fully understand what they're paying for, that can be a barrier to participation as well. And then even if you're able to have one coach in your program that is a fluent Spanish speaker who speaks Spanish to some of those students, even if they can speak like English fluently, it can still just like make them feel more included from what I've read about like they actually belong in this space because this space also speaks Spanish. Even though it's American basketball, it has Latinx roots.
Yeah, that is really powerful. Really powerful. I had an opportunity to work with a couple of my coworkers. They're Peace Players, which your company, sponsors and works with, which is, small world. We were at a middle school in Watts, and both my Espanol es muy malo, but my coworkers both speak like fluent Spanish, and like she recognized that like a lot of people like towards the back of the line like had no idea what we were talking about. So she started translating everyone, and we had someone come up to us after that worked at the school, like a security guard, and being like, "This is really cool because on the playground, like they typically don't play basketball because they're like intimidated." So from my coworkers being able to speak that Spanish, you're talking about your research is like in action. They were actually like participating, and they probably participated the least in my station because I'm, the most gringo, the worst Spanish speaker of the group. But I think it's just in general, like it's really cool to have and include other people, thinking about Latinos and females and like other people that aren't just, white males and males in sports. Like, because again, going back to your original points, sports just have so many positive effects.
Absolutely. And I love to hear that you are doing that. And like, again, barriers to participation in sports that's a barrier systemically like inhibiting someone from these excellent life outcomes that sports produce. So
with that being said, like, I want to wrap up this conversation with like we're going towards the future. Like, what are the possibilities of like for our society, once we start really increasing access for sports, obviously for Latinos, but also for females and a lot of other people who are often excluded from sports?
A few ways to get excited and involved in this is coaching, like offer an array of activity options to your kids. If you grew up playing football and basketball, but your kid really wants to play tennis, like that's okay. You don't have to your kid doesn't have to do what you do, which oftentimes I think we see in sports, especially like parents forcing their kids to play the sports the parent played, which is almost always not an ideal way to join sports. Encouraging like people in your community to be a fan, like take your kids to women's sports games. Like I am so excited, and it like always makes me tear up, the kinds of role models that like these kids will have, especially young girls in the sports world, that like I had to a limited extent, but it's even more so now that the NWSL is so established. Like you maybe saw the video that came out on Twitter like a few weeks ago, but this little boy, he had to be like 3 years old. He was wearing an Alex Morgan jersey and was screaming like Alex Morgan, like screaming. And he was so cute. And then after the game, it was so cute. And after the game, he got to meet her. And it's like, that kid will never forget that, assuming he remembers it because he was so tiny. But like, those are the kinds of moments that are so profound.
No,
and I
that's
hope
beautiful.
that
That's
answers your
the perfect
question.
way to end this podcast, because I think it's so important, to include the more people that are involved in sports as fans, as players, as coaches, the better. And obviously we have to, be mindful in the way that we practice sports, because, we want everyone to feel safe and have a positive experience with sports, because if they do that, they're going to, have more of a positive relationship with physical activity, and physical activity affects our mental health. And, it's just that huge trickle effect, leadership into, job outcomes. Like it's so amazing. And I think that's why I, have this podcast, and I'm so into the youth sports world. And I found my niche of how I want to make the world a better place, going back to, the Better World Challenge podcast. So I've really enjoyed our conversation today, Bailey. Where can people, find or connect with you if they want to, continue this conversation, and or other resources that you have for the coaches and other audience members listening?
I am available on LinkedIn, and please, if you're ever interested in learning more about the work that we do with Fun Play, or the work that I'm passionate about, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Bailey Holloway. I will be posting a series that I'm really excited about, helping people get excited for the 2023 World Cup. It's been something I've been thinking about and working on for a long time. So please engage with that and tell your friends to get excited, because this World Cup is going to be amazing. And I'm very happy about how it's looking and all the teams that have qualified. We have 4 teams. It's their first time qualifying for the World Cup ever. 4 of the 16 that have already qualified, which is really exciting, and says a lot about the movement that has happened for women's soccer around the world. And yeah, I really appreciate being a part of this, Justin. I have loved working with you in the past, and I love seeing you out here advocating.
Appreciate you, Bailey. Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact podcast. We'd love it if you would subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.